So in this project, you are asked to apply what you've learned about conic sections to real-world objects. So in this recording, I'm going to detail the directions for this project. So first, you're going to find a real-world example of the conic section. You may find a physical example just out in the world as you're exploring. Or if you can't find anything in real life, you can find an object or structure online or in print, such as in a newspaper or magazine. I would like you to give me some background, so if you actually found this out in the world, tell me where you found it, tell me a little bit about it. If it's a structure that you found online or in a newspaper or magazine, like a bridge or a monument, for example, give me some background information about its creation. Make sure that you cite any references that you use in a references section at the end of your project. And make sure that you also provide numerical measurements that will be necessary to actually do the math part of this assignment. You might need to know the radius or the height or the width or other information depending on the type of structure. You need to include a picture of the structure, so you can either take a picture yourself or you can find a picture online in a magazine or a newspaper. If you use a picture taken by someone else, make sure that you cite it in your references section. So for example, say that I am going to use the Eiffel Tower, so you're going to want to use something different. But suppose that I decide that I'm going to deal with this conic structure here at the base. So this is resembles a parabola. So I would include this picture in my project, and underneath here I have the source of where I found this photo. And you'll notice that in my references page, one of the reference entries that I'm going to list is for this picture. And so this is an example of what your reference entry might look like. Especially if you get it from a website, you're going to want to make sure that you include the link. If it's a picture that you took yourself, then obviously you won't need to include that in the references section. However, you may, if you use references at all to give a background of a structure or information about its creation, then you may have other entries in your references section besides this one. Okay, after you find a picture of the structure, then you are going to create a scale drawing of the conic section on a grid. This is going to be done by hand, so you'll get some graph paper if you want. You don't have to, but it'd make it easier. And you are going to create a scale drawing. So you need to figure out how you're going to orient your structure. You're going to need to decide on a scale that would be appropriate. And make sure that you label your axes and indicate your scale used. And the steps should be completed by hand, like I had mentioned, without the use of technology. So this will be on your own on a separate sheet of paper. You're just going to sketch it. So for me, for my example with this Eiffel Tower, I would get some graph paper and I would sketch a parabola on my graph. And I would probably have the vertex of the parabola on the y-axis. That's probably how I would decide to do it. And then I would need to figure out the height of the parabola, and I would need to figure out the width of the base here, and then that will help me decide on my axes. How tall up on the y-axis do I need to go, and how far out on the x-axis would I need to go. And so those are decisions I'd have to make depending on how I place this on my grid. But at any rate, that step is done by hand. Next, you're going to use techniques learned from class to form the equation of that conic section. So like I mentioned, you're going to need to know appropriate measurements like radius, vertex, focus, height, width, or additional points in the graph. So whatever information you need. And make sure that you clearly show all your work when forming the equation of this conic section. So not only do I want the equation, but I want you to show me how you came up with it. So make sure that you're showing me your work. Once you actually have an equation, now I want you to use technology to graph this equation. So you can use Wolfram Alpha or a website called Desmos or any other technology that you would like in order to graph the equation that you have constructed. And you're going to need to include a printout of this in your final project and make sure that you indicate to me what kind of software you used. So for example, if you were to use Desmos, you go to www.desmos.com and I'll show you what that looks like. Okay, so here's what Desmos looks like. You hit start graphing. Say that your conic section happened to be a, let's do a parabola. Okay, and let's suppose, I'm just making this up, let's say that the equation of the parabola is negative 50x squared plus 15, or plus 35. Okay, so here's an example of what this does. So I type in the equation, and I can drag this, okay, to see the whole thing, although this isn't, the scale isn't quite great. Here's what the vertex of the thing looks like. And you can play around with this. You can zoom in and out. So I'm just using my mouse. Okay, so you can zoom in and out however you'd like. You can move it around. But at any rate, you're going to need to print this and include it with your project. Okay, and this will graph any of the conic sections that you might come up with. Okay, so once you've used technology to graph it, make sure that you have everything that you need. You need to find a real-world example of the conic section. Tell me a little bit about it. If you have any sources, then make sure that you have a references page. Give any measurements necessary for the math part of the project. Include a picture of the structure, either one that you took yourself or one that you found online or in a magazine or a newspaper. Create a scale drawing of the conic section on a grid. This is done by hand. Use techniques learned in class to form the equation of the conic section, and then finally use technology in order to sketch a graph. Now, how are you going to turn in your project? Well, there are 3 different ways that you can do this. You may type your project and submit it as a Word or PDF document. Remember that the 3rd step requires you to create a scale drawing by hand. So make sure that you include that. You can either scan that and include it as one of the pages. You can scan it and copy and paste it into the document, but you're going to need to include that somehow. And again, don't forget to include a photo of the conic section, a printout of the graph that you created using technology, and then a references section. If you don't want to type your project, you may create a video in which you show and explain your project. So if this is the option you choose, make sure that you capture all parts of your project and clearly explain your steps for when you created the equation of your conic section. So that's going to be important to actually show your work or explain your work of how you came up with that equation in step 4. Or you could create a screencast of your project using a screen recording software such as Screencast or Screencastify. I'm using one of those to make this very video. This type of software records your desktop, and you're seeing that happen right now. It allows you to capture an audio narration of your captured computer screen. So if this is the option you choose, again, make sure to capture all parts of your project. So again, that's the picture of the conic section, your scaled drawing that you did by hand that you might have to scan in to the computer, your work for constructing the equation of the conic section, the actual, and make sure that you include the equation, and then lastly, the graph of the equation that you came up with using technology. And then don't forget to capture your reference entries if you have a references section. So make sure to clearly explain your steps for creating the equation of your conic section. I have some information here if you decide to use Screencastify or Screencast-O-Matic. And then, to finally turn this in using one of these 3 options, you're going to go into Blackboard and go to the spot designated for this project. You can either upload a Word or PDF document if you go with step 1, or you can copy a link to a YouTube video or upload a video file, and that would be if you decide on option 2 or option 3 for turning in this project. So if you have any questions about this project, don't hesitate to contact me and let me know.